Yeah, I think Thailand is in a bit more of a vulnerable spot. You have a little bit more of a political uncertainty. You have among one of the high inflation rate around the ASEAN countries. Certainly pressure on growth. Thailand really need to see a lot more tourists coming back, and certainly without the Chinese tourists, for instance, it is going to be difficult. Although the rest of us from Singapore to Indonesia are certainly going to Thailand side. But yes, you, I think pointed out a good point in that the growth momentum in Thailand is essentially being supported by exports of commodities and resource side that's doing well. But I think going forward, given that inflation is still on the uptick, I think the Bank of Thailand still has, I think we still pencil in, one or two rate hikes in the second half. I think, because inflation is ticking up a little bit, and I think though the growth momentum is still somewhat vulnerable to development outside, there's still enough for the central bank to say they can do at least one hike in the second half of the year.
Seng, the talk, obviously, at times like this is often about, the Asian crisis of the late 90s. And the general consensus up until now has always been, well, the Asian economies are much better positioned than they were back then. Their financial status is much stronger, which is fair enough. But I'm just wondering, at what point do we get worried? I mean, we've seen Sri Lanka having trouble. We've seen Pakistan having trouble. And given what we're seeing now as these the global economic situation develops, will there come a point where we'll begin to ask questions of the Southeast Asian markets or some of the economies here?
Questions. I suppose the key thing really, again, is going to be a case of more companies in the various countries around the region. I think what we have learned very well from the Asian financial crisis of the 98 side was, fundamental imbalances in economy, far less of such stress points among the ASEAN economies. Exchange rate is far more flexible now. Yes, there is pressure point on government fiscal side, but not as bad as a few years ago. So certainly there's still some wiggle room for government on the fiscal side, and certainly for those who are more vulnerable, what has helped us certainly has been the resource side, the export side doing a little bit better, and that certainly help out on the balance sheets on the government side. But going forward, I think it's still a case, and going to be a case, of to what extent the stronger dollar, the more expensive cost of borrowing is going to weigh down on some of the more vulnerable companies, for instance. But I think, by and large, we should be able to weather the storm. There is still room on the fiscal side, and certainly plenty of room on the monetary side as well. So even if we were to say a brief recession, I think we can navigate through it.